The Arctic and the indigenous communities that live there are considered the front lines of climate change.
So we're seeing climate change happen more readily there. It's more obvious, it's more disruptive, and we can learn from those front lines.
That's John Rosales, a professor at St. Lawrence University, who's traveled often to two of those places in the Arctic and has studied how they're responding to their world changing so quickly. And he says they have lessons for us to learn. That's today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Claxton Hepburn Medical Center, dedicated to providing patient care and regional services to the people of St. Lawrence County. ClaxtonHepburn.org.
Hey, I'm David Summerstein. It's Thursday, December 5th. First up, an extensive multi-day search is still ongoing in the Adirondack High Peaks. 22-year-old Leo Dufour from Quebec was last seen on the summit of Allen Mountain on Friday. Forest Ranger Scott Sabo is leading the search out of Newcomb and says heavy snow and high winds have made conditions even more difficult.
Allen Mountain is the most remote high peak in the Adirondacks. It is extremely time and effort consuming to get crews into the actual viable search area.
There's about 4 feet of snow at higher elevations, and now a winter storm tonight is making the conditions even worse. Along with rangers on the ground, the state is also using infrared technology from a police helicopter to search for Dufour. Governor Kathy Hochul is requesting more agents on the northern border. Her request comes amid an uptick in illegal crossings from Canada into northern New York. The Swanton sector, which spans the northern border from New Hampshire to New York, currently employs close to 300 people. According to the Times-Union, Hochul wants to more than double that staffing number. In a letter to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Hochul also said she's opposed to the reduction of operational hours at 4 small border crossings between the North Country and Quebec. John Rosales has studied 2 indigenous villages in the Bering Strait region of Alaska since 2009. He's a professor of environmental studies at St. Lawrence University, and he's publishing a paper about what lessons the North Country can learn from their experiences as their world gets warmer quickly. He says people in these villages have documented 85 changes to their climate, from a changing coastline to melting sea ice to shifts in wind.
They have really intimate knowledge about those changes because they have to observe it for hunting and gathering and herding and fishing. So you either get it right with those observations and you eat, or you don't. So the stakes are pretty high for them as observers of climatic change.
There's one thing in your paper that really drew my attention. A village elder who said that he feels like a child, helpless to help others interpret their environment and to be able to give advice because the climate is changing so fast that there's not that sort of institutional knowledge to rely on.
That's right. The changes are so profound that he doesn't know how to give advice to younger hunters anymore, or people going out looking for berries or picking tundra greens. Some of the changes are just outstripping his traditional knowledge that his forefathers taught him.
And that sort of is maybe a good transition to, what we learn about the North Country and its climatic changes. Obviously, they're different from what's going on in the Arctic. But in your paper, what you argue is that what could be similar, or what is a lesson learned, is that there's a lot of emotional changes and a lot of cultural changes and bodies of knowledge changes that will accompany these actual, biological climatic changes.
Yeah, that's right. There's a term that scholars are now using called solastalgia, which is literally standing in an unknown environment. It's an unsettling feeling. where you look out or you're out in a flooded area like we had here this summer, looking down your street as a river as opposed to a street. That's solastalgia. You don't know exactly what to make of it. So up there, they're feeling that, especially when you can imagine some of the hunters standing on the coast looking for the whales or walrus or seals, but there's no sea ice to be seen. So it's profound change. It's really different, deep change that I don't quite think the North Country is ready for.
So what can we take away here in the North Country from their experiences in the Arctic? What can we learn?
One of them is that people have tremendous local knowledge, tremendous scientific knowledge in their own way. For example, gardeners up here, you probably know a gardener that can tell you everything about the plants that are edible, not only in their garden, but also in the forest. People that go out fishing and hunting have really detailed knowledge that we could all learn from. And sometimes following and noticing really slight changes, like a change in an insect population in a particular stream, that may be really significant for broader changes. So those people are among us, and I think as scholars we should look them up and seek their knowledge out, and they may help us identify the big changes coming. So that's one of the recommendations or lessons learned that I've learned from this. But the other thing is that I've also learned that these two villages I study are very vulnerable. They need help, and the help isn't there in the village anymore. Like I said, the elders are struggling to give advice, so they're having to reach out to governments. And when you think about our area, a lot of our villages do not have regular contact with the state, much less the federal government, where the money would be. I think we think more locally, like local taxes may support X project, but I think we're going to have to look a little bit bigger. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act or the infrastructure bill, those were designed for these type of adaptation measures. But most villages here in the North Country don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the staff to apply for that kind of funding.
You know, what's a big takeaway you have that you talk to people, your friends, your colleagues here in the North Country about what you've studied regarding climate change in the Arctic, you know, how we should be thinking about it here?
Yeah, there's many things. I think one thing I could highlight is something I wrote about in the paper, and that is they have a saying up there, always getting ready. You can imagine your father who's just a busybody, or your mother who's just always fiddling with something just in case you need to move quickly. So they have this as a cultural ethic. They're anticipating. It used to be more about getting ready to go hunting, like, oh, there's seals out there, there are walrus out there, we got to go right away. But now it's been expanded to, we don't know what's coming, but we have to be prepared. And I think that's the take-home message I think the North Country needs to hear too. We have a lot of institutions and organizations and agencies that'll help us out with disasters, for example. Yeah, beyond just emergency managers, I think we all, at all levels, have to think about what might happen, even in our own homes, at our own camps. And certainly the mayors of the North Country need to think about this as well, and the village boards.
John Rosales is a professor of environmental studies at St. Lawrence University in Canton. NCPR's Climate Change series is made possible through the generous support of Margot and John Ernst. You can find all the stories on our Climate Change series on our website, ncpr.org/climate. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Saranac Lake and Oscar Sarmiento of Potsdam. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.